And before we kind of stomp a little bit, no, we don't want to stomp on jQuery. jQuery has taught me a lot about development, so we need to give it its dues. And jQuery kind of started this entire revolution because it was kind of one of the first that said, okay, so this web is a mess. Let's try and fix it. And if you are a regular user of jQuery, you've got things like add class and the dollar selector where you can query elements by their CSS class. And all of these things are now in the actual HTML specification, or the JavaScript DOM API specification. So it kind of started it all way, way back. So over the years, Jerry becomes a professional jQuery developer. He becomes fantastic. And he saves up some money, and he decides to go sailing. So this is Jerry on his adventure. He's leaving the JS world behind. He's just going to fly along on his little JS ship. And if you try and think about this in your current workplace, so regardless of what you're doing, whether it's JavaScript back-end or front-end or middle-end or left-end, try and think about these concepts a bit as in you. So try and follow the story in your own footsteps. So Jerry goes sailing. And time passes, and a year goes by. And Jerry comes home. So after a whole year, if you think about if you went on holiday for a year now, what would happen when you get back? You might have a beard and some penguins. So Jerry comes back late at night. He did, in fact, take his MacBook with him. It unfortunately didn't work out at sea, so he wasn't able to keep up with any of the jQuery stuff, any of the Angular development, and he was completely shut out from the JavaScript world. So he comes back, and there's this the new ES6 or ES 2015, 2016, which is for the back-end developers who don't follow JavaScript, ES6 and or ES 2015, whichever you want to call it. ES 2015 is the official name for the first release. This is kind of the new version of the JavaScript language to make it into a proper language. Angular 1, Angular still exists. So Jerry was happy about that. He knew a little bit of Angular. He knew a bit of jQuery. He was making these web applications. There was also Backbone. Is anyone in here using Backbone? No one? One? You're going to regret putting your hand up. Then there's also Grunt. So this is, I started using Grunt, I think, 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. And then that was like, wow, this is the best thing. And then all of a sudden, this guy comes along and you rewrite. So Jerry comes back and all these new things, like Ember as well, and we've also got React, and all these new things that have come about since Jerry went on his little cruising ship. So naturally, Jerry becomes a little bit upset about this. So he tries to learn some new stuff. He takes on Grunt. He says, you know what, everybody's using Grunt at the moment. We need to start using this Grunt. And for those of you who don't know what Grunt is or have never used it, it's essentially like a command line task runner. It runs on Node.js. So you can essentially have 50 JavaScript files in your app. You can compile them. You can check the lint for errors, all this kind of thing. You can concatenate them, minify them automatically. So he was really happy about this. He finally managed to work out how Grunt worked. He built his first application compiler. He's pushed his project to production. Until he tweets it and says, oh, I've just built this great new app with Grunt. And somebody tweets him back saying, oh, Jerry, this is out of date. You know, it's all about Gulp now. What are you building with these old tools for? And a bit of background for those who don't know Grunt versus Gulp, the whole ordeal. Grunt essentially was huge, and I mean it still is. And Gulp kind of came over and said, this is the real way that you need to do it, and everybody kind of just jumped ship. So all these people were kind of learning Grunt, whereas as soon as they had done that, people were telling them, you need to move to Gulp, like this is old. So that's out of date, which naturally he's a little bit upset again. Then he learned some Backbone. We could talk about Backbone with Jerry, with the one guy. So we like Backbone. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Backbone. It's not one of the most popular things to build with nowadays. I mean, it was like a few years ago. And then he builds his new project, and somebody says, "Oh, Jerry, this is also out of date. You know, nobody uses Backbone anymore." I'm so glad everyone didn't put their hands up. Okay, he gets a little bit upset again. And if you think about the amount of hours that he would have had to spend learning Grunt and Backbone and building all these things, I mean, we've all done it. I mean, we can look at projects in the past that we've built, and you look at them and you go, "Oh, I hope the client doesn't want to change." So at this point, Jerry decides to stop talking to his friends about code. He just keeps building to himself and being happy. I mean, we can all do it. I mean, if a client asks for an application and you want to build it in something you know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just don't tell your friends. So we know already that he knows some Angular 1. So Jerry decides to keep learning Angular 1. He says, "You know what? Backbone's not for me. It's apparently old. Angular 1's still around. It's still being built. I'm just gonna keep doing that." And he becomes an Angular JS master. He loves Angular. He masters it. Until one day, Jerry didn't quite know something on Angular JS, so he Googles how to do something, and he finds this new website, angular.io, which is a brand new website for Angular 2. And at this point, Jerry's gone through this whole ordeal where he's learning things and it becomes out of date, that he becomes very shocked. So he's mastered Angular 1, and it's now at this point where Angular 2 is on the horizon. It's in beta at the moment. And he's a little bit upset. You know, he's like, "I'm wasting time. I've got to learn something new." And it seems that if you had a big project, you could build a big project in one framework or one particular API or tooling set. And then 6 months later, if you had to rebuild that, you would build it completely differently or somewhat differently. So this is where, if anybody needs a tissue at this slide. So Jerry, he gets a little bit upset, and he goes for a walk late at night. Till he finds a ticket that says, "Learn Angular 2, sorry. So he goes to this local meetup, which is what the ticket was for. And he sees all these amazing talks. This is how you build with Angular 2. This is the new APIs. This is the break-in changes. And it kind of looks a little bit like this to him, and he doesn't really understand it. And I think a lot of times you can see, like, I don't know, hundreds of developers out there using all the latest and greatest stuff, and they're pushing the web forward, and they're like building these things that you look at, and they look exactly like this. So he fills out a place. He fills out a place at this meetup, and he starts walking around for someone to talk to, which is where he bumps into ERIK. And I've called him ERIK for E on S, so ECMAScript ERIK. He says, "ERIK, I'm a little bit sad." And he consoles Jerry. He says, "You know what? Don't worry about it. You know, there's probably other people here that don't quite understand what you're talking about." So he gave him some advice. He said, "We're all still learning. All still learning. JavaScript is booming. Things are changing very, very quickly. And you can keep an eye on them as well, but you don't necessarily have to use them today. Things are changing, but don't let them scare you. You don't always have to use the latest things. So just because, I don't know, a beta or has gone into stable, or stable version 14's gone into 15, you don't have to suddenly refactor your entire application to be using the latest stuff. It's okay. But one of my golden rules is just keep an eye on it. So if you're using version 1.3, but then you know 1.7 is out, and you need to learn how to bridge the gap in your brain. So just keep an eye on these technologies, what the breaking changes are, what the new features are, and there will come a point where you can upgrade safely. So Jerry loves this advice. He says, "Yep, that's pretty good." I'll go with that. He starts to feel good again at this meetup. So he goes home, and he realizes Angular 2 is out, and he was previously quite upset by Angular 2's beta release. So he continues learning Angular 1. He says, you know what, I'm just going to keep rolling with it. But he keeps an eye on Angular 2. He just keeps it in his focus, in his mind. So he says to himself, yeah, okay, it's okay not to know everything, but there are people who are always better than you, and there are people always, I hate to use the word worse than you, but there are people with better skills and lesser skills, and we all kind of have our own different benchmark of who we position ourselves against. Like with people, we look at the top of the industry and we go, wow, I would love to be like them. And then there's people like who are very, very new to the industry who will look at someone who looks at someone else like in a completely different way. So there's this whole chain of like, oh my God, they know everything. And then this person looks at somebody else and says, they know everything. So there's this huge chain that we follow. A couple of months go by, and Jerry goes to ERIK. He goes and talks to him again. He gets a little bit upset again. He says, how can I get better as a developer? Like, what would you teach me, ERIK? Because ERIK's a pretty good expert. He gave a great talk at the Angular 2 meetup. He says, am I even good enough to share my knowledge? Can I go out and start writing blog posts? Can I start telling people on Twitter how to do things? He also says that contributing to open source looks pretty scary, which it is. So these were ERIK's piece of advice from previous questions. From these, how can we get better as a developer? Am I even good enough to share knowledge? And contributing to open source looks scary. So ERIK says, why don't you set up a GitHub profile and just create some projects? I mean, there are a lot of people who would love to create open source, but we don't know how. We don't know how to get started. So he says, you know what, just do it. Just set up a profile, set up a project, write some code, and just publish it. If you've written some code in the past where you thought was like, yeah, I've gone home from work and written 100 lines or 200, 500 lines of really cool code, you might want to go home and rewrite it in a better way and make it available for other people. Everybody has something to teach others. So one thing that's quite interesting is I used to actually interview a lot of junior developers, and we used to do like sort of code challenges and all these kind of things over live recording, and they would give me an answer, and because they're new to things and they don't think in the same way as we do, like sort of mature or who have been doing development for a couple of years, they actually think about things in a fresher way and do things slightly differently. And often at times you can learn things from people who have never even written a line of code because their brain just doesn't quite match up to what you're thinking. So they can think in different ways. Nothing was achieved in the comfort zone. So the comfort zone is what we would hope to get out of. So we're going to go through each piece of advice and basically continue the Jerry story. So number one was set up a GitHub profile. So he does exactly that. He creates some projects. He's got Treasure Map, Rum.js, which has got -5 stars, Gulp Ship, Plank, Cannonball.js, lots of sailor jokes in there if you want to digest that in your own time. And you can see at the beginning of his public contributions is that he's created all these little projects, and then he's had this huge dry spell, and he's created a few more. He doesn't really know what to do. So he goes on to Rum.js, which is his most popular project. He gets a comment from somebody saying, this code is bad, it doesn't really do what I want it to do. You know, it's broken. And these kind of comments live around. I mean, if you live on Twitter and follow GitHub projects, there's no doubt that you've seen some of the strange comments and slightly aggressive comments that come around open source issues. I'm not sure why all these comments exist. I mean, people create these open source things in their free time. Some companies have, like Google and the Angular.js project. They are obviously paid to do that as a full-time job. However, for those who create open source in their own time, everything's just a little bit different. So let's assume you get home at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the evening and you go to bed at 11, like a normal developer does. 3 a.m., like a normal developer does. So we have all these repos to create. So if you think you want to start up a new open source project, you've got to create a repo. You're then going to have issues to fix. And if anybody says otherwise, you do not write non-buggy code. Then we're going to have PRs to review. So people will want to contribute code to your code, which can be difficult because people don't discuss the code beforehand. They just say, oh, you need this feature, just merge it, it's fine. And you've then got to then take that code, read the code, work out how it works, maybe make some changes to it, feedback to the developer, and then merge things in. You'll also have questions and comments to answer. Not a lot of people do testing on open source frameworks or libraries, but we'll put that in there. We've then got module systems to cater for. I know in the last few years, a lot of the open source work I've done, people have been, can you put this on Bower? Can you put this on NPM? I'm like, okay, just give me a minute. Then we've also got versioning. So every time a change is made, we need to probably push a new version to Node or Bower or update the package. So if you think about all of these things and how long it would probably take you to do every single one. So let's just assume it takes 10 hours to write a piece of JavaScript, a small piece of JavaScript. You've then got to set up some tests for it. If you wanted to use Gulp or Grunt or some kind of compiler to concatenate things, lint things, you might have continuous integration as well. You've got module systems, like UMD patterns, AMD. There's all these different possibilities, and it's quite intimidating to just push something new because you often think, am I even doing this right? Like, is my code going to be correct, or is this the old way of doing it? So this is a lot, and if you've got one project, that is everything that you're going to have to do in one project. Not everything. There might be more, there might be less. I know some of my fantastic projects have a lot of comments. Not. So, excuse me. So if you think you've got 50 projects on GitHub, that's quite a lot of projects. 50 times that is a lot of work. And if you think about that window you get outside of your day job, that's not a lot of time to go and do all these things. So Jerry sees one of the bad comments on his GitHub, and he starts to become a bit sad. But then as time goes by, and he starts building, and he starts, he gets a feeling of good. He's happy to release things. He's happy to work on open source. And in the end, he becomes in love with open source. He likes creating open source. And there is kind of a good energy that you get from being able to help somebody else out with their code. I mean, even if it's 10 lines of code, it might be the best function on the web. But if it can help somebody else out, then why not? I mean, if you think about the what was the package leftpad that broke Node.js a couple of weeks ago? That was like 11 lines of code, and somebody removed it from NPM, and it broke the internet. So if you want to go and write 11 lines of code that you don't think is important, there's a great example of an important 11 lines of code. So Jerry succeeds in the end. He gets a good buzz, and he gets a good feeling, and he uses all these open source tools, but he's able to give back to the community, and he enjoys that. If you've ever been in England, takeaway means to order bad food, so I'm just going to explain my bad joke. So the takeaways that Jerry gets from this, he knows that it's intimidating to share this code, but he recommends not to be put off by negativity, because you get some strange comments on the internet, especially on places like Reddit. But don't be put off by these things, and don't publish any of your code on Reddit. Have confidence in yourself to be able to do these things. I mean, nobody built AngularJS overnight. Nobody built GitHub overnight. I mean, when we start creating open source projects, we start with an 11-line function, then it grows to a 50-line, to a 100-line, and then we start building our own micro library or something, and then we start contributing to bigger frameworks. I mean, I doubt there's a huge amount of people that would be new to the industry and say, you know what, I'm just going to rewrite AngularJS 30,000 line pull request, and it gets merged. So that doesn't happen. We don't get there overnight. It takes a long while after contributions. Keep creating and keep improving. So that kind of resonates with the previous comment, is just to keep doing it. It's almost like practice. If you want to be a good golf player, you don't just suddenly pick up a golf club and hit the ball and it's perfect. I mean, it takes practice, and we get better and better. So the second piece of advice is everyone has something to teach others. So he sets up this blog. Jerry sets up his own blog. Lazy Loading with Rum.js was his first article that he published. And somebody must have posted it on Reddit because it's got a terrible comment. This guy, Davy Jones, he says, left a comment on GitHub. The code is slow and non-performant. You should use a reverse twisty loop with a Node Express platform and some other made-up stuff. So Jerry doesn't really know what this means. And I've come across these times where I get a comment on one of my blog posts or an open source that says, yeah, you should be doing this. And I have no idea what you mean. Like, I genuinely have no idea what you mean. And it's hard to sort of say, do I just say, what do you mean, and look like an idiot? Or do I just ignore the comment and pretend I've never seen it? So we just ignore the comment. So this makes Jerry a little bit sad, and like anybody would, he'd wake up in the morning, he's got a bad comment on his blog. I'm sure he'll delete it in a few days. Then he gets this other comment from Bootstrap Bill. Pirates of the Caribbean did sponsor this talk. And he says, not bad, I'll check this out. And if you think, compared to the last comment, this is a pretty decent comment, it's quite good. Somebody saying, yeah, not bad, that's not bad, I'll check it out. So it's not a negative comment, it's a mildly okay comment. We could do better. So he starts to go, you know what, everybody doesn't hate my code. This is quite good. Until Elizabeth Swan comes in and she saves the day. She says, wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much for writing this. You just helped me with a new project. Thank you, thank you. And if you were to wake up with that in your inbox, you'd probably start your day pretty good. Whereas if you started it with the first comment, your day wouldn't go so well and you'd spill coffee on your colleague or something. So by having this, this blog and this outlet where you can voice your own opinions, you will get bad comments, like 1 in 2, no, I'm joking, 1 in like 100 or so. Just because people don't agree with your profile picture, or how you write a blog, for example, or the ideas that you're using. I wrote a blog post, I think it was probably like 2 years ago now, on a switch statement in JavaScript. And I just basically said, why don't we just use objects instead and just use a hash lookup? And there were probably 10 comments that were like, you're an idiot. And then those kind of faded away to, oh, this is a really good idea. This is a really good idea. So I'm like, okay, it's kind of leveled the fence out a bit. So don't be like shy to just say, you know what, this might be a bad idea, but I'm going to put it out there. So going back to Jerry's comment, he loves the comment. It makes him feel great. So he keeps working on open source and blogging. He falls a bit in love with it. Has anybody had this? Has anyone got a blog where they've gone on Google Analytics and gone, whoa? No. Damn it. Okay, so this happened to Jerry anyway. This is a made-up screenshot. So he posts, well, he didn't post it actually, but somebody posted lazy loading with rum on his on Hacker News, and it got to the top, which basically equals a lot of traffic if you've ever been on Hacker News. So, well, next, this inspires him to keep going. You know, somebody quite high up might have a decent Hacker News profile with a good ranking, has posted Jerry's story and gone, yeah, this is a pretty good idea. I'm going to post this. And if you think about all the people, the thousands of people, I mean, obviously this is just a made-up stat, but if you wanted to look at this in your own profile, you would feel pretty good looking at that and think, wow, I've written something that 1,000 people are now reading. So what takeaways did you get from this? The online world isn't always kind. Who'd have thought it? The positives, though, outweigh the negatives. So let's assume you get 5 bad comments and 1 really, really good comment. You're probably going to just remember the really good comment and just dispose of the bad ones. Not saying that the online world is like this, but you will get a couple of bad comments, but that's not to say that's a bad thing. I mean, they live everywhere. I mean, if you think of your favorite artist, for example, they release their new album, they get bad comments, but you love it, so it doesn't make any difference. So just be focused on what you can do to share knowledge, help other people. And this sharing knowledge is kind of really important. If you think you can always teach someone something new, I bet everybody here could teach me something new, and I bet Martin at the front could be taught something new by everybody. And it doesn't matter your skill set or your background. If you're a back-end developer, you could teach me something new that would help me write better JavaScript, and vice versa. This is a nice little quote. Build and you will succeed. There's no hopefully, you will succeed. This is probably one of the best pieces of advice that I like to give people who are just starting a blog or just starting off in the web world, or it doesn't matter what world, in the coding world. So you don't know about code until you write about it. And this is really, really interesting because there might be some people sat here going, I know how to code, you're an idiot. Whereas let's take something simple that you do every single day, and if you try and translate that into a blog article that somebody who doesn't know what you know can then go and read, that translation is extremely difficult because you're translating code into words that they can then translate words into code. So you're trying to map this concept across in the way that they can understand, and that's really, really difficult. Even if it's something very, very simple. Previously, when I gave this talk, I used like a for each. Everybody knows how to write a for each loop. Whereas if you try and explain how to do a for each loop, you need to tell people why they need to use a for each loop. You need to tell, I mean, for each is a slightly newer version in JavaScript, newer method in JavaScript, in ES5 spec. However, before that, we had a for loop, so for var I equals 0, that kind of thing. Now we've got array.forEach, so we can just be lazy and use the function. And if you try and explain the differences, explain the internal workings, then you really start to actually learn better for yourself. So not only have you got a great article that explains the internal workings, the whys, the whens, the how, you've also learned a lot yourself about the internal workings. So if you don't believe me, then try it. Try and write. It doesn't have to be a blog. It could be just a gist or GitHub gist or something, anything. Try and write how you would explain something to somebody else with code snippets that build up over time. So nothing was achieved in the comfort zone. I know we all like comfort zones and writing the same code forever. So Jerry jumps on to Reddit, his favorite place for positivity, and he sees that Angular 2 stable has been released, and this is, I'm forward dating this a little bit. It's not released yet. So he sees that Angular 2 stable has been released, and he gets overjoyed. And he gets overjoyed because he can then step out this comfort zone. Previously, he didn't know Angular 1. He was like, you know, it's going to be around for a long while. I need to just keep an eye on Angular 2, and it's changing so frequently that it hurts my brain to keep up with all the changes. So Jerry just he kept an eye on it, and he kept the track of breaking changes. And now it's out, he can finally step out of his comfort zone. So he begins to learn Angular 2. And he comes across this button. So he's already set up a GitHub profile, he's got a blog, and he knows that this button exists. Now, I don't particularly like pressing this button for projects. I find it a bit scary. You know, oh, is somebody going to think my code's useless? Is it got a bug in it? Or is it even what they were expecting? So this is an intimidating thing to do. It's not only just, I'm going to put my own code up online, it's I'm going to maybe look at the Angular 2 project where thousands of people are going to look at my code or in an instance. So Jerry being Jerry, he decides to put a pull request in that says, I'm going to fix the memory leak in the component compiler. This issue doesn't exist, so don't look for it. But he puts this pull request in, and he puts his Mac down. He says, you know what, I'm finished. I'm going to just wake up in the morning and see if anybody's responded to me. And this is his Gmail inbox, and he wakes up in the morning, and he has a merged pull request into the Angular 2 source code, which you'd feel like a bit of a hero, wouldn't you? Coming out of nowhere with no experience, and you've been sailing for a year, and you've got a penguin and wrote some code and set up a GitHub and been on Hacker News, and now all of a sudden Angular has merged your pull request in. And there are a couple of ways that this could have gone. I mean, he could have been kicked down, said, no, this code's horrific. I don't want to merge this. There was no bug in the component compiler anyway. You probably created it, Jerry. Or it could have they could have given him a bit of feedback and said, you know, this is a bug, but it's not a high priority. Or please, can you refactor this and do something different? Instead, they merged it straight in, and he would have probably for the rest of the week go into work and be like, yeah, you know, Angular 2 project. So he would probably be quite smug for the rest of the week and feeling happy. So it goes back to this point that anyone can contribute to open source. It doesn't have to be a big contribution. A lot of people think, I mean, I'm not here on behalf of GitHub trying to make you write code for the internet. I'm just saying how good it is when you do. But anybody can do it, regardless of the size. It could be an 11-line left pad function that breaks the internet, or it could be a 500-line library. I mean, people like to create their own thing and put their own ideas on things. And if you're using like a tool in your day job, for example, that you think could be improved, or you know, like a node module, for example, that you want to do slightly differently, then just go and create it and just publish it. It wouldn't take too long to do. And if you think, like, oh, I don't know how to do Node.js, then spend a few hours, find somebody who does. They can teach you the basics and then help you on this journey to actually pushing something that you want to push. And I guarantee when you've pushed the first piece of code somewhere, it won't be the last. You'll be pushing code every day and being antisocial. So you can learn great things outside of the comfort zone. It's quite funny if you kind of look back to projects that you've done in the past and you think, you know what, the client had a really weird feature request, but I actually learned a lot about JavaScript APIs or JavaScript in general, just because of this weird use case that you wanted to learn in. And it might not be part of your comfort zone, but you'll jump up and start trying to attack it because you have to. It's part of your job. And you don't want to look bad. You need to stay employed. People will judge you, but hold your head high. I mean, you get a lot of strange comments, but just ignore them. If they are slightly negative, you can say, here's the GitHub repo. Feel free to feel free to submit a pull request. Don't be afraid to believe in yourself. Like, I know when I first started off in the web, I was thinking, oh, I don't even know what GitHub is, but everybody's using it. So I just set up a profile. And I can't even remember what the first project was. I think it was like a WordPress theme. I think that was my first open source project. And that .NET Magazine and Adobe and Smashing Magazine, they all tweeted it. So I kind of have a little bit of in this story of why it's a little bit personal story as well. A lot of people at the last conference agreed with this, especially if you check out the previous talk on YouTube. There's a lot of comments that say, you know what, there's a little piece of Jerry inside of me. And I think it's true in any way, shape, or form. whether it's starting a new project, starting a new company, or feeling out of place. So as we come to the end, Jerry decides to upgrade his JavaScript banner now that Angular 2 is out. And these are a couple of his learnings. So Jerry was content with rapid change. He knows things are going to change very, very quickly. He knows that he needs to keep on top of them. He can focus on his core day job, the core libraries, the tools that he's using, but then he can keep an eye on the change that's happening. So he doesn't have to use it straight away, but he knows it's going to happen. He knows nothing will be around forever. I mean, Angular 2 is on the brink of a release candidate now, so it's probably going to hit in the next couple of weeks. But Angular 2 is not going to be around forever. I mean, in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we're going to be building completely different web. I mean, if you think about 5 years ago or 10 years ago, the web was so different than it is now. And there was a lot less JavaScript reliance as well. Jerry wasn't scared of the future, so he knows all this change is going to happen. He knows how to keep on top of things. He knows how to build and step out of his comfort zone. So here's just a final closing thought for you, is after Jerry goes away at the beginning, and he went through this whole ordeal where he had to learn how to do GitHub, he had to learn all these new technologies, and he became up and down with emotions, and he was happy one minute and sad the next. And would you feel comfortable jumping on a boat with Jerry right now, going away for a year, and coming back in a year's time and still feeling relevant? Hands up if you would jump on the boat now with Jerry for a year. Exactly. It's a scary one guy. He's very brave. It's a scary thought. I mean, we would probably be slightly irrelevant because you need to just keep reading. I mean, whether you write new technology, you need to keep reading with this new technology and staying relevant. So that's pretty much it for me. I want to put this last slide up again of nothing is achieved in the comfort zone. So take the step out. Go for it, and thank you.